In the fall of 1970, Grand Rapids, Michigan was a safe Midwest city. It was the sort of place where people didn't lock their doors at night. But all of that was about to change with the murder of Shelley Mills. Her mother, Vesta, who lived in Holland, went to visit her. Shelly, only 19, had just married and lived in Heritage Hill, the oldest part of Grand Rapids. It is filled with Victorian mansions, but back then was close to crime-ridden areas. But this location was ideal for its proximity to Grand Rapids Junior College. When Vesta reached her daughter's house at 314 College Avenue, she honked the horn and got no answer. A knock at the door brought similar results. The door was open. Vesta entered and found a horrific scene. Shelley Mills was dead. Her body was on the kitchen floor and had been stabbed 32 times in the torso, with most of the damage concentrated around the neck. Her body rested in a pool of blood, and her hair was matted across her face. No weapon was located, and no obvious suspects were found. Her husband, Bill, was ruled out as the murderer. The case went cold, but the killer was to strike again. A year later, Barbara Larson, age 25, was found dead in her mobile home in Howard City, 34 miles north of Grand Rapids. Like Shelley, she had been stabbed around the face and the neck. Barbara also attended Grand Rapids Junior College. Once again, there were no leads, and Barbara's case went cold. But the police were suspicious that they had a serial killer on their hands, and that he was on the hunt for young women. 4 years later, in 1975, Laurel Ellis, age 20, was found dead by her boyfriend. Carl Novak found her in her apartment at 627 Fountain Street Northeast. She hadn't been seen for a week, so he decided to stop by and check on her. What he found was her decomposing body, nude, and it had been stabbed over 45 times. Again, most of the wounds concentrated around the neck and face area. The only evidence collected was a single drop of blood on the tile floor. But, like the first murder, this case went cold since DNA testing did not exist at the time. A few months later, yet another body was added to the list. Linda King, who lived on Clancy Avenue, was found stabbed several times and then strangled. It wasn't too much longer when it seemed that the killer had struck again. This time it was Katherine Darling, who was found murdered in her home at 637 Michigan Street in March of 1976. Her house has since been torn down. 2 months later, in May 1976, Lois DeRitter was found in Walker, a western suburb of Grand Rapids. 2 boys found her body lying in a field. Lois was last seen at an interview at Grand Rapids Junior College. Then on Christmas Eve, 1976, Nancy Sweetman was stabbed on Nealon Street. The responding officer, against all odds, was her own brother, Ronald Sweetman. Her body was found here, in the front yard. For nearly a year, the killer was quiet, but his lust for death could not be contained. Ida Mae Lucci was stabbed in the laundry room in this apartment building, 440 Crescent Street Northeast, in November 1977. Perhaps refusing to die, she was also struck multiple times with a banister spindle. Joanne Eggleston was the next intended victim in July 1980. Joanne, age 21, went home to take a nap. A man entered and tried to restrain her with a belt, but she fought back getting stabbed in the throat with a knife. The knife broke off in her neck. The killer fled, leaving her to die. Against all odds, she was able to reach the telephone for help. She was rushed to Butterworth Hospital, where the blade was removed with pliers. After the Grand Rapids Press reported about Joanne's attack, the killer became enraged and struck again. This time it was Katherine Fingelton, age 21, who lived at 641 Lafayette Avenue Northeast. Her body was dumped near Lafayette and I-96 overpass, only a few blocks away from her home. Lamont Marshall, who was always found near the crime scenes, became the main suspect. The banister spindle that had been used to bludgeon Ida May was connected to his home. Prosecutors filed a case of perjury against him after he was found lying to a grand jury regarding the spindle. He was also positively identified by Joanne Eggleston, the lone survivor. With his arrest and trial in 1982 for perjury and assault, the killings ended. Though he was initially only convicted for the assault on Joanne, it seems that a serial killer had been stopped. Later, in 2008, the blood evidence collected in 1975 tied him to the murder of Laurel Ellis. He is now serving a life sentence. In 2011, DNA evidence absolved Lamont Marshall of one murder. Instead, the DNA showed that Catherine Darling was murdered by Russell Vane. As for the other murders, they are still active cases. Shelley Mills, Barbara Larson, Nancy Sweetman, Ida Mae Lucci, and Katherine Fingelton. Though it seems likely that Lamont Marshall was the culprit, if you have any information on who murdered these other women, please contact the Grand Rapids Police.